Senzu beans are something that a lot of us here in the real world wish actually existed. Anytime you've been sick, whether it be a chronic illness or something a little less serious, a Senzu bean could fix it all up. But what are Senzu beans? How do they work? And where did Toriyama come up with the idea for Senzu beans? Where did the inspiration for them come from? On this edition of Dragon Ball In Depth, we're going to look at the secret, mystical properties of Senzu beans and where Toriyama got inspired from and how they actually work and their importance to Dragon Ball. All of that is next. Now, it doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure out that Toriyama created Senzu beans purely as a plot device, an item or an artifact that can be used to heal somebody from, at times, even near-death experiences and bring them back to full health just by eating a Senzu bean, or even eating a part of a Senzu bean can heal you very, very quickly. And these magical beans have been used time and time again in Dragon Ball. But the first time that we ever saw them was back during the Piccolo arc of Dragon Ball. After Son Goku had gotten almost killed by the old Demon King Piccolo, Yajirobe took him to the Sacred Karin lands where they met Karin-san once again, and Master Karin had this magic bean that at first kind of hurt Goku when he ate it, but quickly afterward it healed him of all of his injuries. This is the Senzu. Karin explains that not only does the Senzu heal you from your injuries, it also can keep your belly full for 10 days. Now, there are limitations to these things. Although they can heal broken bones and heal broken teeth and blood wounds and cuts and things like that, they cannot regrow limbs unless you are a character that already has the ability to regrow limbs on his own, like a Piccolo, for example, or another Namekian. However, there is one reference to Senzu possibly regrowing your limbs. In the Trunks story, the story of Trunks manga chapter that was later adapted into the Dragon Ball Z television special about Trunks' future, he does state that if they had a Senzu that they could possibly grow Gohan's limbs back. So it is possible, but I don't believe we've ever actually seen it in the series. Also, it's a bit unclear as to whether or not Senzu can heal specific kinds of illnesses. For example, when Goku gets the heart virus, both in the future timeline and the present timeline, Senzu cannot cure that from him. Likewise, later on in Dragon Ball Super, there was an episode where Gohan's daughter Pan was sick, and they wanted to summon the dragon to heal her from her illness. Why were the beans not used here? Because they probably wouldn't work. So they are limited, but they're still extremely useful. We see the characters use them in some of the most critical moments in the series, like the battle with Cell, and later on during Resurrection F, and that's just a couple of times. They would be used to heal up wounds after a huge battle multiple times. But how do they actually heal these wounds? Where did Toriyama get the idea from for the Senzu beans? I will give you the answer in the next section. In order to delve into where Toriyama got the idea for Senzu and the incredible mystical Taoist inspiration behind it, the name Senzu itself gives you a clue. When you actually dissect the meaning of the word Senzu, you come to find out what's really going on. First of all, Sen is a shortened version of the word Senin, which is essentially an old hermit or a wise man or a sage. Like, for example, Master Roshi's name, Kame Sennin, the turtle hermit, or the Crane Master's name, Crane Hermit. These are some of the most wisest, oldest, and respected sages in the history of culture over there in that side of the world. So that's where that first word comes from, and Zu means bean. So if you've ever watched Dragon Ball subtitled and they refer to Senzu as sage beans, that's actually an accurate literal translation, even though most of the Western world calls it Senzu beans because the English dub chose to use just the Japanese name, which is fine because a lot of anime does that. They choose to stick with the original Japanese names. But what's kind of funny is if you say Senzu bean, you're actually saying sage bean bean. So you're being redundant. Kind of like if you say ATM machine, The M stands for machine, so you're saying machine twice. Either way, it doesn't matter. Now you know that Senzu means sage beans. Now, what does that really mean, though? Where is the historical importance of a sage bean? Well, if you've played any kind of video game, especially a Japanese RPG, you know that there's always going to be magic herbs and magic items that can heal you. Potions in Final Fantasy, herbs in Dragon Quest, and the list goes on and on. So the idea of having a plant with healing properties is something that we see all over fiction, especially from the East. And in addition to that, we find out in Dragon Ball that Karin actually grows the Senzu within his own little area in his tower. So there is a plant that he cultivates this healing power from. The idea of immortality pills and healing medicine that can be turned into a bean form or a small round object is extremely common in Taoism. And if you study the history of Dragon Ball, the culture behind Dragon Ball, like Derek Padula has done in his Dragon Ball culture books, you come to learn how much inspiration Toriyama took from Taoist beliefs. There is so many little things that are so much deeper than surface level when you examine Dragon Ball, and not just Dragon Ball, other manga as well, that it's always been very interesting. Derek in his book brings up something called external alchemy, or Waidun, and he discusses that essentially the Sennin, the sages, are able to cultivate themselves and grow their own energy, sort of like the Senzu beans and other kinds of fruits and whatnot can grow themselves. And what ends up happening is the master places a seed inside of his disciple, sort of like a metaphorical seed, but in some cases they can be interpreted as being literal seeds. And these herbal concoctions can elicit internal responses and produce fruits like supernatural powers, immortality, or enlightenment. And essentially, he will plant the seeds supernaturally into his disciples, and then they will do it to their disciples, and thus so on and so forth. They continue from generation to generation. In the 1st century, Taoists believed that if you want to seek immortality, you have to perfect the absolute essentials, which include consuming great medicine. So that's why, again, you always see sort of herbal supplements, alternative medicine coming from that side of the world, and you see it both in fiction and in the real world. Go to any health food store. You'll probably see a section of Asian medicine, Korean ginseng, Chinese herbs. They're everywhere if you go to a health food store. And because of that, for centuries, they believed there was a form of magic granted to them by the gods in these medicines. Each ingredient gives you a certain percentage of yin and yang, which balances the body. And according to legend, these Taoist sages knew how to create these pills, these beans, to increase their lifespan, get rid of their illnesses and injuries, and possibly even become immortal. Now, when it comes to Senzu and Dragon Ball, Yajirobe eats more than any character in history, and he does not become immortal, so that doesn't quite work in this series. Interestingly enough, Master Karin himself tells Goku that he's over 800 years old. So it makes you wonder, did he eat these beans and extend his lifespan? That is a question we may never get an answer to, but I think it makes the most sense because he is the one growing them. Now, even though Toriyama never thoroughly explains how these things work, to get the answer to that question, you have to look into the Taoist belief system of how their magical seeds worked, and it sort of makes sense for Dragon Ball. When you take a Senzu or one of these magic pills, however you want to call them, all of your subconscious hidden energy comes up to the surface, sort of like how characters in Dragon Ball get their power unlocked. It's kind of similar to that, but on a much smaller scale, and energy, ki that is, flows all throughout your body, everywhere, sort of like on your arms, legs, and you sort of have this feeling of deep meditation. Derek Padula would describe it in his book as, and I quote, microcosmic high energy matter from the subconscious dimensions within our body, aka dimensional layers beneath the molecules, atoms, protons, electrons, neutrons, all that stuff, surging up to the surface, having damage be undone, and having all the particles be refined. And thus, because of this, the reason that you don't have to eat for 10 days is because you have so much strong, high energy fueling your body that it does what food is supposed to do, and that's provide energy to all the cells so that all of your cells have nutrients without the need for food. In addition to that, it also repairs your cells. So that is the clearest and simplest explanation of what a Senzu is. and where Toriyama got his idea from. What if Senzu were actually real though? Now, obviously what they do in Dragon Ball, it's pretty impossible for one being to heal that many injuries, including bones, but what if there was a food that Dragon Ball inspired in the real world that can provide nutrients for your body? And we'll talk about it next as we close out with part 3. It's always amazing to me when Dragon Ball can actually inspire someone to make the world better. Another story that Derek Padula found is the story of a Japanese inventor named Mitsuru Izumo who tried to invent a real-life Senzu equivalent bean. There is a food supplement that his company sells called Euglena that provides the body with a complete day's worth of nutrients. He was interviewed in the 2013 Wall Street Journal article and actually confessed that it was Dragon Ball that inspired him to release this medicine. And I quote from the interview, "What I realized was that the miracle the world needed was Senzu. Senzu have all the nutrients people need, and so do Euglena, both plant and animal nutrients." And he pretty much goes on to say that it is the closest we've come to a real-life Senzu. And you could even mix it with cookies and soup and things like that, whatever you want. And even though it might not give you immortality or heal you from broken bones, apparently it's able to give you lots of nutrients, sort of like a multivitamin, except with more stuff in it. I've never tried them before, but it's kind of cool to see that scientists have been inspired by Dragon Ball. And that always puts a smile on my face that the world's actually being made better because of inspiration from this little manga. So that's kind of cool. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this edition of Dragon Ball In Depth, and I hope you learned a lot about what Senzu are, where they come from, and Toriyama's ideas behind them. I thank you once again for watching, and I will catch you down the road. Take care of yourself and each other.